Dr. Bucci, thank you. That was really interesting. What a great story, too. I love that. Anita, thank you so much for having me. I loved meeting you at the Weather Channel. You came to visit. I'm just so happy to be here with you and with all of you in the AMS. It's been a great day and a great weekend so far. All right, so I'm going to pick it up where Dr. Bucci and her colleagues left off, which is they fly through all these hurricanes, and then you literally can access, like she was saying, oh, we send it to researchers. We show their product on air. Like, we will show the planes flying in. We can show you where they're flying in. We can grab their data, and we use this data not only for where we're going to place our crews when we go out to cover these things live, but also just how to inform the public. Because if they see, okay, it's intensifying, and then we're like, okay, it's intensifying, here's the data. The Hurricane Center is actually showing us the data, and we use that in where we're going to, end up, I guess, when all is said and done, because there's certain places we can't end up, and obviously we're going to talk about that. So what I want to do also is talk about the climate aspect of storms, because yes, the climate period is much longer than I'm going to show you. We're just going to look at the last 5 years. And obviously, when you're talking climate, you're talking 30 plus years and the whole 9 yards. But this will just give you kind of a good idea of what we are starting to see in the field, where you see a lot of changes happening with these storms, whether there's more of them, they're rapidly intensifying, the rainfall, and just some of the big concerns we have when we're talking about climate. So this is just back, it just is shocking to me. It's like since 2017, this has been 5 years, right? I mean, it's not a long time. And we have had all of these, and all of these storms. Does anyone know what is similar about all of these storms? Any meteorologists out there that know? They're all Cat 4 or Cat 5s, just in the last 5 years, which is kind of shocking. And when you talk about hurricanes, I don't know where everyone is when it comes to how much meteorology you know. So I'm just going to give like a few little refreshers and stuff like that. Is that, you go from Cat 1 to Cat 5. And if it's a Cat 3 or higher, that's considered a major hurricane. And obviously, if it's a 4 or 5, that's a big deal. Ida, Laura, Michael, does anyone remember any of these? I don't know if you experienced any of them. I see a lot of head nodding here. They were all a really big deal because they were just so intense and so big. One of the indicators, and I'm sure Dr. Vecchi will talk about this, is the rapid intensification and how we're seeing more and more of these storms rapidly intensify. And what a rapid intensification is when you have, I'm sorry, I'm so used to being a meteor, I'm like, I need to go point to this here, I'm like awkward, like I need to pick it up and go over there. The maximum sustained winds, they are going to go up by 35 miles per hour in 24 hours. And that's really, really fast. 35 miles an hour in just 24 hours. When you see that happening, everyone's like, oh, geez, our eyes get big. So here's a look again at those 5 storms. And notice, you only need it to go up 35 miles an hour in 24 hours. And look what all these things did. Harvey, Irma, Michael, you go down the list, and you look at Ida, 70 miles an hour in 24 hours. I mean, that's obnoxious, really. Let's just say that. And the thing is about this is it went from a Cat 1, I have the numbers here, it went from 80 miles an hour to 150 miles an hour in a matter of 24 hours. So it went from a Cat 1 to a Cat 4, by the way, kind of borderline Cat 5. A Cat 5 is 156 or higher. So it was getting out there. And it did that, by the way, like 30 hours approximately. It's like 29, I think. There's no one in here who's going to knock me for that, right? It was like 30 hours before landfall is when this all was happening. So you have someone maybe that is thinking, oh, they go to bed, oh, it's just going to be a Cat 1, it's all right. And then they wake up, and the next thing you know, it's like, okay, we have a Cat 4, like borderline Cat 5, heading right towards us, which is a totally different story when you're talking about hurricanes. Now, of course, we always advise no matter what the strength, even a tropical storm. I'll tell you, I've been in some strong tropical storms. You always want to obviously be the most protected you can no matter what it is. So, that's one of the reasons that we really have to pay attention to these and get the data that the Hurricane Center is sending in so that we can warn people, and people are paying closer attention. Hurricane Michael also comes to mind because that one was also really intensifying as it was coming ashore. And you can see this, and you'll notice the little mesovortices you see kind of the wobble in the eye wall here. Like, watch around here, you'll see these little wobbles in there. Those are like really intense winds in the eye wall, essentially. That's a good way to describe it, right? And so this is a look at Michael coming in. Now, for Hurricane Michael, I originally was going to go to Mexico Beach. You can see that here. I'll point it out just in case. Right here, right where the eastern eye wall was. And what we do is we go in our war room at the Weather Channel, and we literally are pulling up like, okay, how hot, what is their elevation there? You can look on Google Earth and look at all the different buildings, like is there anything strong? And I truly was not comfortable, nor was the Weather Channel. By the way, they're like safety first. If you're not comfortable, if they're not comfortable, it's not happening. No one cares. So I was like, there's nothing in Mexico Beach that I feel safe in. Wait till you see the next slide, but we'll get there in a second. So we end up in Port St. Joe. We found this family who, for some reason, had a house. It was built like in Florida on the coast, this huge hill. I don't know what it was or why it was so big. And they had a new build right on top of it. They're like, no, it was built however many years ago. It's all the code, this, that, and the other. Okay, we'll start in Port St. Joe and see what happens from there. So the morning of landfall, we're on air, and we're getting this data, and we're like, oh my gosh, this thing is starting to crank. And here I am on Port St. Joe, right there on the coast, and we see this thing coming in. I'm like, I do not want to ride like a Cat 4, Cat 5, a Cat 3 eye wall out in Port St. Joe. Like, that's crazy. So this shows you a little idea of where I was.
So even though our house behind me is up 24 feet, you see that? We are completely exposed to the ocean. Right there is the ocean, right there is the house. And this thing could come in as a Cat 4, maybe a Cat 5. So, which of course, it came in technically as a Cat 4, and then they upgraded it to a Cat 5 after the fact. But honestly, like Cat 4, Cat 5, they're both really bad. Like it doesn't really matter when it comes down to it, right? So we were that close. So that morning, and I was on air with Cantori, and he was like, Abrams, come to me. He was over in Panama City Beach. He was like, just pack up your stuff and let's go. And I have my whole crew. I'm responsible. I'm the meteorologist. I know what's going on. So I said, that's it, guys. I called back to work, and I said, guys, and they're like, yep, we agree, and we all just left, because a little wobble one way or another, which these things do, no thank you. So we went over to Panama City Beach, but this is what was left, of course, of Mexico Beach. So a couple of things that you can notice here is, like where our house was in Port St. Joe, it was the ocean, and then you had like A1A, and like our house would be right there. So if we had stayed in Port St. Joe and it wobbled, it could have been a disaster. But notice also how far inland everything went. You know, the waves and the surf, and how just destructive it all can be. It was completely wiped out. So every little square, I mean, you can see people's homes gone, a couple of buildings that are standing, but you know, the thing is that people continue to build on the coast. Can we build, you know, more resilient? And Dr. Vecchi, I know, is going to talk about this and has talked about this, that we have to adapt to these types of things. Can we build stronger? Is it possible? Because these waves and the storms are just so intense, especially right at the coast with less friction, and wipes everyone out. So we ended up in Panama City Beach with Jim. And even over there, where we were in the western eye wall, just for a quick explainer, on the eastern eye wall, the storm is moving forward, and the winds on that side are going in the same direction. So it's like double on the right-hand side. If you ever hear people talk about like, oh, the eastern side, versus the western side, where the winds and the storm is counterclockwise, are going this way, but the storm is moving that direction. Obviously, you don't sleep on the western eye wall because it's bad, but that eastern eye wall is like really where it's bad because the storm's moving that way and the winds are moving that way, if you ever hear anyone kind of talk about that. So with all that said, at the Weather Channel, you know, we connect the two and we talk about it. And Dr. Sikowski talked about our show Pattern, shameless plug, Monday through Friday, noon to 1, live. The only live climate talk show and sustainability show. Can't help myself. Our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, he was formerly the director of the Hurricane Center and came back to us after that. I asked him kind of like what his biggest concern was, and I was actually a little surprised at his answer. So here's what he had to say about it. How does climate change affect the forward speed of a storm?
Well, because we are tending to have more high latitude ridging. And so instead of troughs coming in and accelerating storms up the East Coast, they are either recurving more slowly or they're downright stalling. Look at the past several years of storms like Florence and Imelda and Dorian. I mean, these really slow movers at all different intensities. Slow motion makes all of the hazards worse. And that's probably the thing I'm most concerned about, is even if the strengths and numbers of hurricanes are not increasing, and I think the strengths are and the numbers maybe are just a little bit, but I'm more concerned about the water impacts from slower, wetter storms.
Because that's how most people die.
Right, exactly.
Is that surprising? What would you be most scared of? Who would be most scared of the water in a hurricane? Who would be more scared of the wind? Yeah, a lot more people raise their hand, right? But the #1 killer when it comes to tropical entities is the water. Now, this slide's a little bit old. It's courtesy of Ken Graham, who used to be the Hurricane Center director a while back. But it's just to point out, like 90% of direct deaths are surge or rain. This goes from 63 to 2012. 90% are from the water, which is shocking statistic. I remember back in Katrina, I mean, you forget all the water pushes up all these rivers, and like way far inland, you have this insane flooding. I mean, the St. John River, after Ian went through, was out of its banks for weeks, literally in flood stage. It was outrageous. And you're talking a river that's inland and people flood inland. So water is the #1 killer. This is just 2 years, but also just to show you that inland flooding, this only says 4% storm surge. This was on just obviously a 2-year period. Every storm is different. Sometimes you have more with surge, sometimes more with flooding. But the point being is that water is, you know, the #1 killer with all of this. So that is something that we really try to emphasize, because everyone is always obsessed with the winds and the eye wall and where's it going to hit. And yes, that does damage. I'm not taking away from that, but water is huge. Here's another example. This is the record for rainfall from tropical cyclones or remnants. So you're talking hurricanes, you know, any sort of tropical storm that kind of sits and spins. Look at our numbers. These are records for the state. For the state. And this has all happened in the last 5 years. Again, so we're seeing heavier rainfall. And this is a pretty well accepted thing, that these storms are dumping more rain. I mean, it's pretty accepted in the community. Wouldn't you say it's totally accepted? Totally accepted in the community. It's happening. So Harvey, I know now I have like a PhD professor right in front of me. I'm like, Harvey, that's 5 feet. And remember, a 1-story building, this is just, again, very general, is about 10 feet, like in a house. So you're talking about 5 feet. Half of the house is flooded with water. So it's just to emphasize again that the water is such a huge, huge issue. Now, I don't want to discount the winds, because obviously that is a huge problem, and actually more people are affected by the wind. And so it has a huge footprint. This is Laura. Now with Laura, remember, we're a little bit inland, a couple miles, because you can't be by the coast, obviously, when these storms are coming in. Jim and I were at hotels right next to each other. I was on one side of my hotel. He was on the other side of his. So you'll see him make an appearance in here. And we are at neighboring hotels. And this thing was cranking. And this will just give you a gist of what it's like to be in the eye wall of a Category 4.
And it is too dangerous to be out there. Glass has been shattering, and we've tucked ourselves back into a corner so that we will be safe. So I'm going to be quiet and let you hear the sounds of Hurricane Laura.
You know, people mentioned the freight train thing. I think this is what we're talking about. Here's Jim and all his gear.
Oh, yep. Yes, it is going to be close. But right now we're in the eye wall, Steph.
I moved inside. It got too dangerous.
We're now inside the casino, and that is the wind whistling through the building. Do you hear how loud that is? How eerie is that? That is what a Category 4 eye wall sounds like inside a building. Wow! Holy cow!
You can see why we moved inside. It was just way too intense. And by the way, there was power here, which is very rare, but it was a casino. So I've now learned, if you ever want to keep power, they have to legally keep the machines working. I don't know the technicality. Maybe there's a lawyer in here that knows. They can't shut down. I don't know why exactly. So they had to keep the power on. They're like, no matter what, we will have power on. I was like, amazing. So here are some of the winds, just to give you a gist. You know, you're talking Lake Charles, 134 miles an hour. It looks like tornado damage when you're at that strength. I mean, yeah, obviously it's a really strong tornado. And then, of course, we get to Ian here. And remember, all this wind is what kicks up the ocean and causes the surge and causes the waves. This is Mike Seidel. He was with Hurricane Ian right over Sanibel Bridge in Fort Myers. And this is what it looked like from his balcony, where he couldn't get live shots out, but they were taking video. And obviously, this isn't even the worst of it. because we can't be where the worst of it is. But this just gives you an idea. I don't know what that noise is, who knows? And don't forget, we're getting, data from the buoys as well that come into us, and we're saying, oh, there's a wave height 30 feet, 40 feet, and you're like, okay, when those wave height starts going up, it's a big deal. So that was Ian. A lot of people would compare when it was coming in, okay, Ian versus Charlie, but we know every system looks different. They have their own thumbprint, as Dr. Sikowski likes to say. And so we just wanted to show you guys a little comparison. Charlie, they were the same speed coming in, but look how much faster Ian was going, 9 miles an hour versus Charlie was going 22 miles an hour versus Ian at 9. What does that do when they're slower and when they're bigger? They can build up a lot more surge, and obviously it can do a lot of destruction. Charlie was like a buzzsaw, though. This was my first hurricane, was Charlie. I was in Daytona Beach. It was a Category 1, and we had damage over in Daytona Beach, just with these huge things. But surge, of course, was the big deal with Ian, and Charlie got 4, maybe 6 to 7 feet there of Sanibel. But again, remember, same storm, just the size and the speed were different. That's Ian, what we just dealt with. Look at Charlie. So essentially, the core of the strong winds of Charlie could fit inside the eye of Ian. And so Charlie, the wind damage, I remember, was so bad and just absolutely horrific. But quickly, my time's up, so I'm going to get through it as fast as I can. Here's some of your surge numbers. The forecast was up to like 18 feet. And this is all preliminary, but 10 to 15, is what actually happened. And then you have the rainfall. So we try to emphasize also so much on the Weather Channel that these are not just coastal storms. If you live inland, you're going to be affected by this as well. So we really try to remind people, again, with the flooding. And the St. Johns River, by the way, is like, if you look west of Jacksonville, and for a fun fact, it's one of the only rivers in the world that goes north. If you like trivia night, if they ask about rivers that run north in the US, that's one of them. So obviously the slower it goes, the more rain. Charlie, we didn't have this many issues, but the wind in Punta Gorda and everything was terrible. So it's just something that we have to keep looking at. Is we get the data from the hurricanes hunters. It helps us position ourselves. It helps us explain to the viewers what's going to happen. But with the changing climate, are we going to see more of what I just showed you instead of, these happening every couple of years? Will it be every year we have these major systems? So that's where I leave you now, and Dr. Vecchi will pick it up and let you know what we do with all that data and how it's all going to play out. Thank you.